Hi there, everybody. I'm Lucas Martell, creator of Walkabout, and here we are in our new 8-bit Lair course. So let me give you a little tour. So 8-bit Lair is the third course in our Villains Lair series. And the Villains Lair, we kind of have a couple of things that they always do. They're always sort of focused on a different type and a different sort of era of villain. So we had the sort of 60s laser lair. We had more of the 70s sort of Cold War era for Ice Lair, and then 8-bit Lair takes place in the 80s. So we've got a very classic 80s skyscraper sort of vibe going on, but there's a lot more to it that you'll see as the tour goes along. And then the other thing that always defines the Villains Lair series for us is that we also have a new mechanic. And so because this was arcade inspired, we actually went with some breaker bricks. So throughout the course, there's going to be a ton of these that are in your path, and you've actually got to break through them in order to gain access to the hole or to certain other little things that you need to do throughout the course. So it really changes up the gameplay quite a bit. We spent a lot of time dialing it in, but it proves to be a really fun mechanic that I think people are going to love. This course also features something else that's new for the very first time, where we're actually kind of seeing the villain pops up through holograms to speak to us throughout the whole course. And because it's arcade inspired, of course, it's got the very classic text on screen, so you don't have to take the time to read it, but if you read just a few lines of his dialogue there, you'll get a lot more of the story and why things are the way they are. So yeah, so it's a bit of a departure, but also I think fits really nicely within that Villains Lair series. Vincent Vector is our villain that you'll learn all about throughout this course. The first floor starts out in the lobby, and you'll kind of learn a bit more about his nefarious plans. And of course, we've got to get into the sort of the 80s cubicle space in here a little bit. So we spend just a little bit of time exploring the inner workings of Vincent Vector's sort of evil corporation, with all sorts of fun nods to the 80s, both the color scheme and all the fun digital stuff. I think one of my favorite details is the giant boombox sitting right over the cubicle here. There's also just a very sort of like a nostalgic hit that a lot of folks, especially like me who lived through the 80s, of just like seeing certain things like all the floppy disks and the VHS tapes and all of those little details. So as you play through, Vincent Vector actually explains that this is sort of his where he's manipulating the stock market, because that was like one of the classic 80s tropes throughout all of those, throughout that whole era. There's also a couple of fun little details that you might notice if you go up to any of the computers in here that gives you also another hint that something else is going on. As you get close, you might see a couple of messages start to pop up on the screen that you'll get to much later. And I've been trying to sort of like avoid spoiling anything, but it's going to be very difficult in this video not to spoil things. So just massive spoiler alert. I highly encourage you, if you're going to play the course, check out the course first and then come back and maybe treat this as a bit more of just sort of a commentary on it a little bit, because there's a lot of surprises in here and it's impossible to really see or talk about much of it without kind of giving it all away. So the first 4 holes take place here in the the corporate lobby and the cubicles. Really introduce people to the brick breaking mechanic. And then I'm going to hop into the elevator to head up to the second floor, which is the arcade level. So one of the other mechanics that we introduce is also, there's a couple of holes that don't actually have holes. They instead have coins. And I can't show this because we're in game mode right now. But when the ball rolls over them, you've got to basically hit all of them to pick them up. So that allows for a whole nother very new, fun mechanic. And I will say that those are super satisfying. To get the perfect shot that just rolls through all of them. And you just get this nice little plingy, gold coin sound. So it was the 80s. We had to do the arcade. I love the carpet. Oh yeah, the idea was that he actually could just buy a real car and just turned it into his video game. So yeah, the arcade is definitely one of my favorite places in this whole course. There's just, again, instant nostalgia. The terrible carpet that I now want to have in our office somehow, if we can get that made. So one of the other fun little details that we managed to get in was that several of the arcade games, I think there's 5 in total, are actually playable. So if you walk up to them, you actually start hearing the sound. And I don't believe that you'll actually hear me playing them. But yeah, so you can actually sort of go up and manipulate them, actually play them. I believe the driving game, any of them that have the screens lit up are actually playable. So yeah, we had a lot of fun coming up with some, you know, classic throwback feeling games that are also totally original. There's one over here that's probably my favorite, which is the Spring and Sprint, but that actually has our Mighty Coconut character as the guy that you're controlling a little bit. Throughout all of this, if you're following as you'll be playing through, you'll be getting little bits of story and sort of kind of Vincent Vector sort of like welcoming you to the company. But this is where it takes a little detour and you kind of have to go off script a little bit. So also in classic 80s style, you got to ride the window washer up to break into the top floor. Die Hard was obviously a reference. Like, basically think a lot of the action movies and anything vaguely hacker related from the 80s. WarGames, Tron, there's definitely going to be some Tron references in there. All things 80s action movies. I also want to call out the score that Chris Raymond did for this, which just feels like such perfect 80s hacker music. I imagine that he bought a yellow suit to perform this in. So yes, of course, here we're in our abandoned floor, which was also, it seemed like it was in a lot of 80s action movies. And then you will have to ride the scissor lift down to the next floor. So this is the floor that is off limits and lets you ride the window washing unit up. Because this is Vector's top secret lab. I'll skip the sort of roundabout that brings you over here, but we'll start walking into the lab. So here you can see that this was the 80s. This was where Vector was starting to play with virtual reality. So we've got a lot of early VR prototypes. There were actually a bunch of people investigating virtual reality in the 80s. And so we've got a whole fun little story thing that ties into that and shows how he was trying to make virtual reality a thing. And of course, he realized pretty quickly that, virtual reality is just terrible. Why not just find a way to digitize real reality? And so the next couple labs show how he was actually doing that, turning apples into voxels and starting to digitize various different things, and essentially sort of turning into a virus that was just sort of gobbling up all of the real world, which we get to and sort of show that off through the series of the next couple of labs here. Again, spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. Please go play the course first, because the way this unfolds and plays out when you're actually in here is really cool, and there's a great build-up to everything. But then he finally succeeded, and he built a portal into this virtual dimension. And of course, us being Walkabout, you've got to go through it. So the last, I believe this is hole 13 right here, so the last several holes all take place here in Vector Reality, because of course he would name it after himself. But we just got, this was a ton of fun, and actually really hard to do, but we just went whole hog on like all of the 80s. We were looking at a lot of like the Trapper Keeper folders from the 80s and just like all of that sort of like digital art that was starting to become kind of a thing. Things are reflective for no reason. There's just all sorts of crazy extreme colors. And yeah, this kind of coming up with this whole landscape was a lot of fun, a lot of work, because it's so unlike anything else that we have done. It also let us really push things as far as like the size. So the holes that all take place in here are absolutely massive, because how we're doing this whole space and just rendering it is done in a very, very different way. But yeah, the tech art team had an absolute blast with this section of the course. So one of my other little favorite details that they added in was that all the city in the background is actually showing the VU meters from the actual soundtrack that's playing. So you actually get, it just seems like a ridiculous and kind of stupid thing that of course they would have done in the 80s, because rule of cool. But yeah, so again, as you would be playing the course, you would actually see the hologram of Vector coming up and kind of talking you through stuff, taunting you, giving you clues, but more often trying to foil your attempts to catch up with him and defeat him. So yeah, we are definitely missing one of the big elements, which is all the villain discourse that happens throughout here. Here we'll come up. We've been working on this course for about a year. Pretty much all of our courses take about a year to do now. The Villain's Lair courses always seem to feel a little sketchy until right at the end when we manage to pull them all together, just because there's always something about the mechanic. If we were playing a full game, you would also see Vector talking about that he has actually digitized all of his employees. And these are the actual humans that used to work there. So this is, I guess, another first, because we've never actually shown other humans in our game at all. But we decided that voxel humans would be an okay. I guess we had Wallace and Gromit in there, so maybe not a total first. But yes, this is the first time that we actually explain why there are no characters throughout the rest of the course. Love the view of the throne room, looking out at the city. And I don't know if there's a name for that type of rendering of the sun, but it just seems to be like the quintessential 80s thing that we basically just had a wish list of all the things that we had to see, and we just went through and tried to check every single one of them off the list. So I am also realizing that I kind of don't want to give away the very, very end, because you definitely won't be seeing it quite right in this mode, but there's a big finale sequence that happens with a boss fight in the final pyramid. So one of the separate things that we're doing totally aside from this course, although definitely inspired by it, is we have a Walkabout 64, I believe it's called. We have basically like a Commodore 64-esque version of Tourist Trap that will be launching with Arcade Legends. I believe it's also going to be available on through our website, but it was actually something that that Edward Felix actually did as part of just sort of like a little side project. He's one of our artists who is best known for Hiding the Lost Balls and one of our main 3D artists here. But yeah, he did a whole a kind of a reimagining of Walkabout as if it were a video game from the 80s. And they took that at Arcade Legends and spruced it up and are actually releasing it as part of Arcade Legends. But yeah, they have been absolutely fantastic to work with and did a great job of, like, I don't know what you want to call it, because it's not exactly a port. It's kind of a whole new thing. And it's like, yeah, the retro reimagining of it. But yeah, it's super fun. Highly recommend folks to check that out. So here we are coming up to hole 17. Definitely one of the other inspirations for this hole and a couple of other things throughout was also pinball. So one of the other interesting things that happens is that as the ball breaks the bricks, it also pings off of them a little bit, almost sort of like the almost like the bumpers on a pinball table. So kind of a 2-in-1 mechanic that we get with those, that we get to have some fun with and use them to create some unexpected kind of puzzles for you to solve in terms of how to get past all of them. But yeah, definitely a little pinball inspiration with all this as well. Because we're in regular play mode and we're not actually playing through, you won't see one of the big features here of 18 that hopefully most of you experienced as you were playing through, which is the boss battle. So we're like, well, we've got this whole dialogue happening with the villain. We have to find a way to end this in the most epic arcade style that feels worthy of it. So everybody had a lot of fun, really, just going to town on this boss battle with lots of unnecessary but totally necessary explosions. Even the music changes for a little bit just to give us that boss battle feel. And all the villains' dialogue just really adds up to make it feel like, I think this is probably going to be one of the most memorable whole 18s that we've done, just from how it plays and how it really plays into the arcade style. So night mode, obviously the biggest difference was that these the breaker bricks that we're using really let us create some, even without changing the footprint of the holes, to massively change how the course plays. And so there are some that are quite a bit bigger. There are some that completely change up the gameplay in terms of how you're either meant to use or avoid those breaker bricks. And then from a visual standpoint, especially the Digiverse here has a really, really cool look to it. Once totally gets a huge palette swap. And we're also able to tell a little bit more of the story. So the Vector bad guy character definitely is treating this as sort of a rematch, and so he starts taunting you right from the very beginning and trying to throw you off your game, and it was a lot of fun to come up with all those extra little details. And it's the first time that we've ever tried to tell an explicit story that does vary between easy and hard, as if they were, the hard version essentially being almost like the sequel. I hope you all enjoy 8-Bit Lair. It's a super fun course, and stick around because we've got a lot more fun stuff on its way.